Every night, Max, the loyal German shepherd, curled up beside the crib of baby Emma. The room was quiet, filled with soft moonlight filtering through the curtains. Max had been protective of Emma from the moment she was brought home. It was his unspoken duty. But one evening, something changed. As the house fell silent, Max's ears perked up, and his gaze fixed on the ceiling above Emma's crib. His usual calm demeanor shifted, his low growl broke the silence. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a quiet rumble deep in his chest. Max stood, eyes locked on the ceiling, his growls growing louder. Emma stirred in her crib, but the parents, Sarah and David, didn't think much of it at first. "Max, what's gotten into you?" Sarah whispered from the doorway. She patted him gently, trying to calm him. Max only glanced at her briefly before resuming his watch, his growl unwavering. Each night, the same pattern repeated. Max would settle near Emma, then suddenly rise, staring and growling at the same spot. His behavior became impossible to ignore. Something wasn't right. Concerned and confused, Sarah and David decided to take action. Max's strange behavior became impossible to dismiss. Night after night, he stared at the same spot on the ceiling above Emma's crib, growling with increasing intensity. Sarah and David, though puzzled, knew they couldn't ignore it any longer. "We need to get someone to look at this," David said one morning, glancing up at the ceiling with unease. The next day, they called a professional to inspect the house. The contractor, Mr. Harris, arrived with his tools and a flashlight, ready to take a closer look. "Dogs can sense things we don't," he remarked, noticing Max sitting protectively by Emma's crib, still watching the ceiling. Mr. Harris began his inspection, climbing up into the attic and carefully checking the structure above the nursery. A grim expression crossed his face as he traced his hand along a cracked pipe. "You're lucky you called me," Mr. Harris said seriously when he returned. "There's a leak in the pipe. Water's been seeping into the ceiling, weakening the structure. The materials are soaked, and mold is starting to spread. If this isn't fixed soon..." He paused, looking at Emma's crib. "The ceiling could collapse right here." Sarah gasped, clutching David's arm as the weight of his words sank in. Max, sitting quietly by Emma, let out a soft bark as if to confirm the danger. Without hesitation, David made arrangements to fix the damage immediately. The crib was moved out of the nursery, and Emma was safely settled in their room. Max, ever watchful, followed closely behind, never leaving her side. The repairs began the very next morning. A team of workers arrived, bringing tools, ladders, and heavy sheets of plastic to protect the furniture. The sight of the damaged ceiling was shocking. Water stains had spread far beyond what Sarah and David had noticed. Cracks spidered across the surface, and the wood beneath was warped and brittle. "Another week, and this could have come crashing down," one of the workers muttered, shaking his head. Max stayed close to Sarah and baby Emma, his watchful eyes always flickering toward the nursery. It was as if he still didn't trust the ceiling, even as it was being fixed. Sarah ran her hand through Max's fur, grateful for his instincts. For days, the sound of hammering and drilling filled the house. The leaking pipe was replaced, the mold was treated, and the ceiling was reinforced with new materials. Sarah and David barely slept, constantly checking on Emma to ensure she was safe in their room. When the repairs were finally complete, the workers gave the family a clean bill of safety. "It's good as new now," Mr. Harris reassured them, smiling. That evening, Sarah and David carefully moved Emma's crib back into her room. The ceiling looked solid and clean, as if nothing had ever happened. "Max, you saved her room," Sarah whispered, kneeling beside him. Max wagged his tail slightly, his job not yet done. He walked into Emma's room, circled around her crib, and laid down in his usual spot. For the first time in weeks, the house felt calm again. But as Sarah and David watched Max quietly settle in, they knew they owed everything to their silent hero. With the repairs finally completed, life in the house began to return to normal. The nursery was safe, clean, and bright again. Sarah decorated Emma's room with fresh curtains and soft toys to make it feel warm and cheerful. That first night back in her crib, Emma slept soundly. Max, as always, took his place beside her, his body curled up protectively at the foot of the crib. But this time, there was no growling, no restless pacing, and no uneasy glances toward the ceiling. The house was quiet, peaceful, and secure. Sarah and David sat on the couch that evening, finally able to relax. The weight of what had almost happened still lingered, but relief washed over them. "I can't believe we were so close to a disaster," Sarah said softly, looking at David. "If it weren't for Max." David nodded, glancing toward the baby monitor on the table. Emma's soft breathing filled the room, and a faint rustle told them Max was still there, ever watchful. "He knew something was wrong long before we did," David said. "He's not just a pet, he's family." Over the following days, the house settled back into a routine. Emma cooed happily in her crib during the day, her tiny fingers reaching for Max whenever he came close. Max, in turn, became even more gentle and patient with her. It was as though their bond had deepened through the ordeal. Neighbors who heard about what happened marveled at the story. "A dog saved your daughter?" one friend asked, astonished. Sarah smiled proudly. "Max isn't just any dog. He's Emma's guardian." As the days turned to weeks, Max remained by Emma's side, a silent protector who had proven his loyalty in the most extraordinary way. The family felt stronger than ever, knowing that they had their very own hero living under their roof. Months passed, and the memory of the near tragedy began to fade, but Max's heroism was never forgotten. The bond between Emma and her protector grew stronger every day. Wherever Emma went, Max was always a step behind, his gentle eyes watching her every move. Sarah often found herself watching Max with quiet gratitude. "We don't deserve you," she would whisper, scratching behind his ears as his tail wagged slowly. Max seemed to understand, leaning into her touch before returning to his watchful post beside Emma's crib or playmat. One sunny afternoon, as Sarah watched Emma giggling on a blanket in the living room, she turned to David. "Can you imagine what might have happened if Max hadn't warned us?" David shook his head, a solemn expression crossing his face. "I try not to think about it," he admitted. "That dog saved our little girl's life." The story of Max's heroic instinct spread among family, friends, and neighbors. People stopped by to marvel at the German Shepherd who had sensed danger before anyone else. Some even joked that Max was like a guardian angel in fur. As Emma grew older, she would toddle around the house with Max faithfully by her side. She tugged at his ears, held onto his fur for balance, and nestled into his side for naps. Max never flinched or moved, his patience and loyalty were endless. One evening, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, she noticed Max lying quietly by the crib, his head resting on his paws, his eyes half closed but still alert. She sat on the floor beside him, resting a hand on his back. "You knew, didn't you?" she murmured. "You knew something was wrong long before we did. You saved her life." Max lifted his head slightly, nudging her hand with his nose as if to reassure her. That night, as Sarah and David lay in bed, they listened to the peaceful sounds of their home, Emma's soft breaths through the baby monitor and Max's faint snoring from the nursery. "He really is a hero," David whispered, breaking the silence. Sarah smiled in the dark. "The hero we didn't deserve, but the one we'll always be grateful for." In that moment, they realized that